My best friend is having an affair with a married man. My name is Alex Turner, and I've known Emily Blake for over a decade. I still remember the first time we met, at a cafe. She was wearing a simple gray sweater, with a quiet smile, but there was an unignorable resolve in her eyes. Back then, I never imagined our friendship would grow so close over the next 10 years. She's always gentle with others and never judges anyone, but today, I want to tell the story of her and a married man, a story that leaves me confused yet forces me to think calmly. Emily runs her own small design firm. She's independent, intelligent, and never relies on anyone else. I know she's always been cautious about relationships, rarely letting herself fall easily. But 2 years ago, she met Richard Hale, a man who serves as the president of the overseas branch of a multinational company in her city. He's a well-known figure at the company, even the media occasionally covers his schedules and events. The first time she mentioned Richard to me, I had a strange premonition, but I never expected things to unfold like this. She told me they met at an industry conference. Richard was already married with children by then, yet he seemed drawn to her. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another common professional networking interaction. But soon after, things started to change. He began flying to her city every week to have dinner with her alone, and even took her on trips abroad. Emily laughed as she said he always found excuses to come see her, and I found it hard to believe at the time. Once, she even asked me to attend a party, saying she wanted me to meet Richard. I refused then because I thought something was off, but he showed up anyway. That night, he sat at the other end of the dining table, dressed in a neat suit, with a confident yet casual smile, as if what he was doing was perfectly justified. I noticed no one else there knew about his relationship with Emily, yet the intimacy between them was almost tangible in the air. Emily told me Richard's wife had no idea about their relationship. But I found that nearly impossible. They met almost every week, and even went on several long overseas trips. How could she not know? Sometimes, I'd secretly search for his name online. Seeing news about his business trips or events in the media always made me feel uneasy. I began to feel conflicted. Emily is my closest friend, she never judged me during my hardest times, and she's the kindest person I've ever known. I shouldn't judge her either, but whenever I thought about her relationship with Richard, I couldn't help but feel a sense of disgust. She told me she didn't care about marriage, nor did she want his money. She was just fulfilling her emotional needs, and since she was busy focusing on her company, she was content with this arrangement. But deep down, I knew if this came to light, there would be victims: Richard's wife, his children, even his company. Richard was using his position and time, and clearly, company funds to sustain this personal relationship. If all this was discovered, the consequences would definitely be severe. I started to think about how to handle this. Maybe I couldn't intervene directly, but I didn't want to just stand by and watch. First, I cautiously tried to learn more about Richard and his family. I found out his wife's name is Olivia Hale, and they have 2 children. Olivia seems gentle, her social media is filled with photos of daily family life, and her smile is warm and natural. I thought maybe she really didn't know, but it was also possible she knew but chose to endure it for the sake of her family and financial security. This thought brought me a little relief, but at the same time, it made me more cautious. I couldn't make assumptions easily. I decided to start gathering facts. The first time, I followed Emily to the airport. She was going to pick Richard up. I sat in the car and watched him get off the plane. Richard was wearing a black trench coat and carrying a briefcase. He looked like a typical executive. But the moment he saw Emily, a smile instantly appeared on his face, a smile that made my stomach clench. Emily stepped forward, they hugged, and there was a kind of tacit light in their eyes. A voice in my head reminded me, this was definitely more than a friendship. After several observations, I noticed Richard and Emily acted together almost openly, with no attempt to hide. Whether in restaurants, cafes, or even malls, they would occasionally hold hands or stand very close. Every time I saw this, I felt uncomfortable, but I also wondered, if both parties were willing, and if Richard's wife really chose to ignore it, then who was at fault? I wanted to analyze this calmly instead of judging based on emotions. I started trying to talk to Emily about this. I said, "Have you really never thought about his family? What will happen to his wife and kids?" She replied softly, "Alex, I can't control other people. I'm only responsible for myself. I don't want to hurt them either, but I can't deny what I want just because of that." Her tone was calm, but I could tell she had her own boundaries. She wasn't the kind of impulsive person. As time went on, I felt more and more that I couldn't just be a bystander. Richard's actions were already affecting his career and family. If I did nothing, real victims might emerge. I began to devise a plan, one that wouldn't directly hurt Emily, but would force Richard to face the consequences of his actions. My plan was simple, but it required precise execution. First, I confirmed all the facts and collected evidence. Using social media, public reports, and travel records, I established a pattern of Richard's frequent business trips and evidence of his interactions with Emily. Then, I kept my distance from Emily to avoid getting tangled in complicated emotional conflicts. I made it clear to myself, this was about responsibility, not jealousy or judging her life. Next, I chose a colleague from within Richard's company as an information channel. This colleague had the trust of the management but didn't blindly trust Richard. I organized the evidence I'd collected, raised questions, and implied that such behavior might violate the company's code of ethics. If someone within the company paid attention, they would launch an investigation, so I wouldn't have to confront Richard directly. During this time, I watched Emily's reaction. She didn't seem to notice my plan, she only occasionally asked why I'd been a little distant. I told her I was busy with work and needed to focus, and she just nodded without asking further. I knew she had her own judgments about relationships, and I didn't want to ruin our friendship. I just wanted things to follow their rightful course. A few weeks later, the company launched an internal investigation into Richard's behavior. In meetings, several executives discussed his travel schedules and expense reimbursements, and began questioning his personal conduct. I didn't attend these meetings, but from reliable sources, I learned that Richard's actions were gradually being exposed. Meanwhile, I kept my distance from Emily and watched to see if she would realize the risks. I knew she wouldn't resent me for this, she understood my calm, principled way of doing things. Richard felt the pressure. He started meeting Emily less frequently, became more cautious about his business trips, and even provided the company with incomplete and untrue travel reports. I knew he'd realized he could no longer do as he pleased. His attitude toward Emily became noticeably anxious, but she remained calm. She told me, "Alex, as long as he doesn't lose control, that's enough for me." I looked at her and understood that her rationality and emotions had reached a certain balance. In the end, the company imposed an internal penalty on Richard. He lost some of his authority and was required to formally report all business trips. He began to control his personal behavior, yet Emily's life didn't fall apart, she remained focused on her career. My plan had achieved its goal, to hold the responsible party accountable without harming the truly innocent. I watched the whole process calmly, feeling a complex sense of satisfaction. I learned a lot from this experience. I realized that friendship and morality aren't simply black and white, they require calm analysis and reasonable action. Faced with complex human nature and relationships, I chose to balance things with reason and action, rather than getting lost in emotions. Emily is still my closest friend, and Richard had to take responsibility for his actions. This is a story about responsibility, rationality, and friendship. Standing as an observer, I both protected my friend and upheld fairness. If you were in my position, what would you do?